Hi, welcome. You're joining the Colorado Business Roundtable, virtual roundtable on immigration and workforce. And we're so pleased to have a wonderful panel today virtually talking about this important issue, and especially in light of the new normal that we're facing economically. The Colorado Business Roundtable is a public policy organization representing some of the state's largest employers, and we unapologetically tell the story that business is good. So we're joined here today by some of our strategic allies, particularly on this subject matter, to talk a little bit and have a conversation with you virtually on this important issue. So I want to first welcome our panelists that are here. We've got Megan Pfeiffer, who's the Director of Immigration and Workforce Policy with the Colorado Business Roundtable. Welcome, Megan. Hannah Siegel, the Managing Director of New American Economy. Welcome, Hannah. And Kit Tainter, the Senior Advisor for New American Integration, representing the Office of the Governor for the state of Colorado. Welcome, Kit. And last, we've got Lee Wheeler Berliner, Managing Director of Colorado Workforce Development Council. Welcome to you, Lee, as well.
Thank you.
So first, to start us off, I'd love to go around and have each of you tell a little bit more about your story, what brought you to your organization, and what your organization in particular is looking to solve or looking to connect on the issue of workforce and immigration. And Megan, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Kit after that, kind of in the order of introduction.
Sure, thank you so much. Well, my background, I am originally from Iowa, and I come with about 14 years of public policy experience between government affairs work and public affairs work, as well as strategic communications. I've been working on business issues since I started, and one of the issues that I had been working on for the last 5 years was immigration reform, coming from a business and economic standpoint, and actually was lucky enough to work with NAE for years with Hannah, and so I got really into the issue. Was working last year with the Chan Zuckerberg initiative on some grant funding for immigration reform, which ended up connecting me in with COBRT, which I had been working with before on immigration reform, and this great position was opened up and I was lucky enough to get it. And so that's how I've kind of ended up in Colorado, which I was already crazy about the state anyway. And yeah, from our perspective, what we really want to do is to determine what the workforce issues really are that are happening in Colorado. And that was the goal prior to the COVID outbreak. It's definitely now more so after the COVID outbreak, and how immigration intertwines with that, and what are some of the things that we can be doing to help things move forward in DC from Colorado's standpoint and help out our members here at COBRT. So that's kind of my backstory.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. It's so fun to have you in Colorado, and kind of odd timing, I'm sure, as you get to know our state. So hopefully we'll get better really soon for you.
I was here about 2 weeks before the COVID outbreak, so not much mountain work yet, but eventually.
It's true. Welcome, Kit. Your plate is very full working at the governor's office. Tell us a little bit about you and the work that you're doing there.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. My role is new with the governor's office, and it's part-time also with the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. I'm about 12 weeks in, I would think, to my role, but I do come with a big background in community work in Colorado with immigrant and refugee communities, as well as work at the state. So just prior to taking this role, I was the state refugee coordinator with the Department of Human Services, and then also served as the president of the state coordinators of refugee resettlement. So a lot of great work in that field. Prior to joining the state as state refugee coordinator, I was the executive director of the Colorado African Organization, which introduced me to the wide array of challenges that many immigrants in Colorado face, specifically from African backgrounds, but also a lot of our allied groups were folks with backgrounds, whether that was Asian, Latino, or otherwise. So I feel like I have a good sense of the community built over years of relationships, and then also I'm able to bring that into the public policy and government space, I think, in these crucial times, which has been very interesting. And as everyone, my job has changed. If my charge is to identify and address barriers to integration that refugees and immigrants face in Colorado, that just got different and just got more complicated. But it also is a great indication of kind of the importance of a role like mine to make sure that we're thinking about new Americans, whether that's urgent needs that are public health or long-term needs that have more to do with how we recover from this current situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. As Debbie said, I'm the managing director at New American Economy, which is a bipartisan organization dedicated to changing the way that people think about immigrants in America and to immigration reform at all levels, local, state, and federal. I've been here almost since the beginning of the organization. I've been working on it since 2012. It started in 2010. And we have a few different buckets of work. We do a lot of original research looking at the economic impact that immigrants have in communities across the country, as well as how the current system hinders us. And as we think about how to help respond to the COVID crisis, we've worked closely with a lot of governor's offices, mayor's offices, businesses, and other partners to try and get them the data they need to think through immigration policies, protecting immigrant communities, getting information out to immigrant communities. I think a lot of crossover to what Kit thinks about in her job. So our research team is really important to that. We also have a huge network. We have a presence in all 50 states. We work very, very closely with the business community, with Colorado Business Roundtable, and others in Colorado and across the country, really trying to bring the business voice into the immigration debate. And our theory of change from the beginning is that you need a different way to talk about immigration in order to bring people of all ideologies to the table, because the reality that everybody on this panel knows, and probably everybody in the audience, is that immigration is a workforce issue. It's an economic issue. It's so much bigger than what the national rhetoric might suggest. And so what we try to do is provide data and stories and partnerships and organizing across the country to make that point effectively. And so in addition to the research, as I mentioned, we do a lot of state organizing. We actually have a coalition of business leaders in Colorado that will publicly launch soon. So if there are business leaders out there interested in that, please do get in touch with Debbie or with me directly about that. And we also try to reach new audiences through videos, through partnerships with chefs, with artists, with musicians, with all different kinds of people who can speak to this immigration issue in a new way. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about NA.
Great, thank you. And Lee.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It is great to be with you for this conversation today. I get to lead the Colorado Workforce Development Council, and the CWDC is a powerful governor-appointed business-led coalition that is focused in on the strategic alignment of our talent development network throughout the state of Colorado. And I've had the pleasure of working with the CWDC since 2014. And at that point in time, I started really with a policy focus. I was attracted to the organization because of where it sits in terms of bringing together education, workforce, economic development, and higher education to really ensure that individuals have the opportunity for meaningful employment and that companies have access to skilled talent that can really lead to individual and statewide economic prosperity.
Perfect. And Lee, I'll just jump right back. You know, we've had a couple conversations. When I first met you, I believe it was in December, you know, talking about workforce needs and understanding a little bit of the business climate in Colorado. And some of our business, you know, folks with the Business Roundtable felt like workforce was really one of their number one issues, trying to attract talent and hire well in Colorado and beyond. And so much has changed. And I'd love to start with you on that, you know, as far as workforce and talent and all the different really great research that you've done. How has the new normal with the virus and the shutdown and lots of unemployment claims and layoffs, how has that affected what your mission is going forward? And, you know, how can we be helpful as far as our network in that to support what your new mission is likely to be?
Sure. So at the core of what we do, we are continuously looking at the supply and demand equation of talent. And so does the state of Colorado have the right supply? And do we have individuals who are educated, who are skilled, who are ready to meet the demands of the economy? And do we have the right infrastructure to support a continuous pipeline of those individuals? And so it's always understanding what the needs are of employers, the directionality of our economy, and making sure we can match up that supply to that. If I look back a few months at the start of 2020, that really was about what do we do to focus in on supply in a labor shortage environment, and how do we set up the right types of programs to be training people for the new economy, for impacts of automation. How do we unlock pools of untapped talent, those individuals and communities that sometimes are ignored when there's a glut of labor and people looking for work, but in a tight economy can really add value to a company. Now we're suddenly jumping into the opposite side of that equation, where we've seen record high unemployment claims, and it's very different than the 2008 recession because of the timing of everything. We have seen unprecedented numbers of unemployment insurance claims in terms of what is filed in one specific week. And so we're still understanding exactly what that means. A number of those individuals are job attached, which means that as the economy reopens and as we emerge from the public health crisis, we feel good that there are a large number of individuals who will be able to return back to work with that same employer and can continue in a very similar fashion. What we're looking to best understand is what will that segment of the economy be that is truly experiencing a new normal, that does not hire at the same level, they don't bring people back in the same way, that has to rethink how they are sourcing their talents and what they're doing. I think fortunately we have a lot of the right pieces of infrastructure in our state around work-based learning, around the concept of skills-based hiring that companies can utilize, that as we emerge from the public health crisis and the economy gets going again, people will need to hire, and it will still be critical to bring in people with the right skills to match your needs for your specific company, and people with a mindset of lifelong learning to be able to continuously embrace the changes that we know technology will continue to bring as we look forward to the future.
Mm-hmm. And Lee, I know you and I spoke, I believe it was just yesterday, and understanding that your role has probably gained even more importance than you had in January, that it's so critical to help workforce and business connect. Again, some will be the new normal and some will just be able to jump back in quickly, but appreciate all the work that you and your staff are trying to do to help get Colorado back to work when we're able.
Absolutely. And fortunately, we have a great network of local partners and other state agencies that are all focused on supporting both impacted employers and impacted individuals to get companies to help them be resilient through this time and to get individuals back to where they want to be.
Great. And that kind of leads me to Kit as well, because she's serving in such an important role for the state of Colorado. So we'll talk Colorado first and then kind of shift into, big picture with some of the national reform that's going on. But Kit, tell us how, you touched on it a little bit with your intro, but tell us a little bit about how you're looking to utilize, whether it's technology or partnerships or new strategies. And I know probably all of our strategic plans are a moving target right now. No one's got it all figured out because the game keeps changing to some degree. But Kit, tell us what's your day like? What's your planning look like for your role on immigration?
Great. A lot of it overlaps with what Leah's been talking about. A lot of the focus of my work, I think pre-COVID, but then will be post-COVID too, is how we respond as a state to ensure that we are being inclusive of the talents and the skills that the immigrant and refugee community bring to our state. So the conversation is really focused on education and workforce. I think, kind of because of the situation that we were in beforehand that Lisa would have talked about, where we were really looking at how do we ensure that there's a supply for workers that we know our Colorado businesses needed. So we were really focused on how we ensure that the immigrant and refugee community is stepping into all of those opportunities that businesses had at that time. And then we'll be talking about that as the economy recovers as well, right? We know from a lot of research that oftentimes people with additional barriers, whether those be people in poverty or people who don't yet have English fluency, are sometimes left behind as the economy recovers or recover at a slower rate for their jobs or for their families. So a lot of it is making sure that when we're stepping forward with the work alongside Lee and his team, our local workforce centers, or strategically as a state in general, that we're remembering kind of all the additional things that we need to have in place to make sure that immigrants and refugees kind of recover at the same rate in their workforce and their wages as other people in our communities. Right now, I would say that we're very conscious that immigrants and refugees are overrepresented, if you will, in a lot of the industries that have already been affected, whether that is hospitality or food service. So when we're thinking about what are the kind of immediate things that folks need to ensure their basic needs are met, we're really focused in on making sure that folks in the immigrant and refugee communities that may be a little bit more disconnected from government services are aware of all the services that they're eligible for and that are coming out. And then again, we're using our good network of community groups and community allies to get messages out to the Nepali speaking community, for instance, as well as longer term communities that may still be isolated because they haven't necessarily participated in our education and workforce over the last couple of years. So, we're kind of focused on those two areas right now. I think that the reason that I'm really excited, to be in this position is to bring a focus to this work. But then also as, we kind of work into the recovery phase, that we're honoring and remembering all of the reasons that immigrants and refugees are important in our workforce. And we're really driving that forward in the way we would have done prior to COVID. We're reapplying that again as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, some of the work stays the same and the mission stays the same. In some ways, it's tactics and shifting and timelines and
I think what'll be interesting to see is what gets accelerated as during this crisis. So for instance, we know that we have a lot of immigrants and refugees who are underemployed. So do we kind of lean into them better as states or as communities to make sure that we are plugging them into the right place when there are so many needs, let's say in the healthcare field right now. So we're also sort of hoping that in some ways we're able to look back and at least in some levels, not totally, be able to think about positive things that came out of this crisis that are long-term sort of employment or workforce goals that we already had. Recognizing that no one wants to be in this situation. I don't think anybody thinks that this is a good thing, but we are sort of focused on how do we future-proof this and how do we make sure we're moving forward in the same ways that we wanted to prior.
Yeah, I really like that future-proofing. This will probably lend itself to a different type of preparedness, not only community in terms of supply chain and manufacturing, for example, but also for nonprofits and government agencies and allies that we have, to think about these black swan events in a totally different way in terms of preparedness. So really, really good. Hannah, jumping in for you, it sounded some of the work you do, of course, in all 50 states. I really was struck by what you said about policy. You didn't phrase it this way, but I took it as a policy is personal. And that's why you talk about stories related to workforce and some of the folks that perhaps you've seen, be really good stories of folks who've been successful here that have come, from other countries. Tell us more about that and a little bit about what your goals are for NAE going forward with the coronavirus impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe working backwards, starting with your question on coronavirus, a lot of what Kit said really resonates with the work that we do. I know people on my team have worked closely with her, and we're working with a lot of states whose governors in particular are thinking very strategically, not only about how to meet the needs of the immigrant communities right now in the middle of the COVID crisis, but also in recovery and in how we can achieve some of our long-term goals. Maybe this presents an opportunity, not one that I wish were happening, but the underemployment issue in particular. We have so many shortages across healthcare sectors and so many immigrants here who are qualified to fill those shortages. And there's actually been a long time movement to try and sort of matchmake in that space. Now that there is urgency around the COVID crisis, is there a way for all of us to work together and make that happen, and then carry that into the recovery process and beyond? So we're doing a few different things at NAE in light of COVID. I think the biggest one, like I said, is working with our network of state and local leaders. We work in about 100 communities across the country in between 30 and 40 states at any given time with government leaders. And many have come to us not only to ask for help from the policy technical assistance side, but also to say, hey, can you connect us to other peer offices? We need to be sharing ideas. We need to be sharing best practices. things that we're thinking of that we're working. Obviously, this is a very, this is all in process. This is happening right now, and it's just started. So one of the things that we're doing in addition to policy help and research is just trying to connect, I guess, the Kits and the Lees of the world to each other, or of the country to each other, so that we can be working together to move forward towards recovery. To your earlier point, Debbie, we're also working on telling the stories of immigrants on the front lines of the pandemic. And I think, storytelling has been a tactic for us for years. I think many people start to understand issues better when they see it from a personal lens of somebody who's in their backyard, their neighbor, their grocer, their doctor, whoever that might be. And so we've utilized it towards immigration reform in the past. Now we're in this unprecedented scenario where we are all facing a common enemy that doesn't discriminate. And so we're really thinking about how we tell the stories of immigrants and Native-born Americans on the front lines together fighting this crisis. Somebody said to me yesterday, we're only as strong as our weakest American in the face of COVID-19. And it's true that taking care of your neighbor right now is also taking care of yourself, and it's what's required for us to push through. And so I think when we do storytelling, and we do it through sourcing and writing and placing hundreds of op-eds and feature stories in local and national papers across the country, showing how really entire communities of immigrants and Native-born Americans together lift everybody up in the face of COVID, and frankly, the rising xenophobia that's come alongside the virus. We think that that's really important work, but also there's a message of solidarity that we hope will really resonate. So we're thinking a lot about that as we respond.
Okay, thank you. And then Megan, tell us about how your work is adjusted to some degree regarding the coronavirus and the new normal. Give us a sense of that.
Sure. Well, I think getting your hands around, obviously, the workforce needs prior to and how it looks now, and combating the xenophobia that's been going on, it's not necessarily any different. But as Hannah was saying, I think something that, and I hate to use the word positive, but something that has come from this is moving from a place of a competitive mindset to a place of helping your neighbor, right? And working together, and how can we do these things? And so I think that it's opened up mindsets, not only at home, but also in DC, and that's a time to be able to talk about these things. And so if we're in a discussion of helping out our neighbor, we need to be helping people understand who their neighbor is, and what they're bringing to the community, and how they're helping us prior to the COVID outbreak, and how they're helping us now. And so I think that while our path is still very similar in trying to get the information on the ground from what our workforce needs are, and having a better grasp of what they are through the COVID-19 outbreak, we will have a better sense of how to go about bringing these stories forward, and how we can really help support our representatives in DC who are wanting to talk about this issue, and helping combat this, increased xenophobia with borders being closed and travel restrictions and things like that are all happening. And so, yeah, it's kind of changed the lens, but at the same time, it's a similar path, and we have a lot of things that will be similar into how we discuss things, but it's about changing tactics of how to get people to actually hear it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And a couple more kind of closing questions. And I think what's been interesting about the discussion is, we've got so many interesting elements when you just think about workforce alone, putting in perhaps the immigration discussion on top of workforce, but thinking through how business can be helpful in hiring practices and understanding what they need in terms of labor, understanding how government plays a role in bringing some of those partnerships together, and also the nonprofit community, which I don't think we mentioned, that might have an interesting role in caring for our neighbors at this critical time. And I think I've always been excited about the interconnectivity of our success. You know, when the business community thrives, for example, people are hired, that certainly solves a lot of problems, et cetera. So this interconnectivity is so interesting to me. When you think about the organization, your organization and your goals for the future, how do you think about that in terms of the interconnectivity? I think about rural, and Lee, maybe I'll start with you again too. You know, what's happening in the rural sector? How does that impact the city? You know, we've got, you know, perhaps some distrust of topics like immigration right now with so many, you know, so many out of work. There could be some other sort of social dynamics around that issue. But what do you think in terms of how do we all partner together to move forward? And I guess that's kind of a real general question, but I'm curious. I think we've got a real opportunity in a time of crisis to come together in a way that puts politics aside to some degree. So how does this interconnectivity help us move the ball forward for whatever mission your organization is looking at? And Lee, I'll have you take a stab at that first, if you don't mind.
Sure. So for our focus, it is about that connection for individuals to obtain meaningful employment and for companies to get access to talent. And that access to talent is needed regardless of where someone is coming from. And there is a real opportunity to embrace the new Americans that are in Colorado who come to the state with a lot of skills. Oftentimes they lack a specific credential or a specific certification that some industries lean on because they've used it as a proxy for hiring in the past, or have some other belief that that's something that just is absolutely needed and they're not looking past that. When companies can shift how they're hiring and thinking about fundamentally, what does my company need? What are the roles that are critical in my organization? And what are the skills required to do those roles really well? When companies take the time to break that down, which is something that local partners and state partners are here to help companies do and help you figure out what that looks like, then you can go to the broad-based community and say, here's who I'm looking for in my company. Perhaps that is people who have been born and raised in this community who fit that profile. Perhaps it's people who are brand new to the state and to the country who bring those skills with them. And perhaps as a company, I can open my doors as a training partner to let all those folks come in who are in need of work right now so they can learn on the current equipment that we're utilizing. They can learn on the technology that is in use each and every day based on what the market demands. And through those training opportunities, then businesses can really be supportive of people in their community and ensure they've got the right talent to grow at the same time as well.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Kit, you want to take a stab at that? Any kind of new partnerships that you're thinking about or interconnectivity in this time?
Yeah, I mean, to build on what Leah said, I mean, I think that, you know, anytime we're looking to rebuild, if you will, or to respond to a crisis like this, it's all hands on deck. And so it's been a really great sort of display of what I think makes Colorado a really great place to live, in which we really do work really well together across sectors and across different entities and businesses. And so I think that there is a lot of synergy that is happening right now. And that is like, how do we mitigate the economic impacts of kind of the current situation, and then how do we sort of build upon those to create kind of a better opportunities for workers, but also better opportunities for businesses when they look to re-engage, if you will, with the economy after this current situation. So, you know, a lot of the conversations that I had with businesses before the crisis were really about how to diversify their workforce, speaking a little bit to what Lee was talking about, how to take advantage of the skills that immigrants and refugees bring. And so that conversation is still there. It might shift a little bit into certain sectors that come back, if you will, with a roar, and certain sectors might not come back as quickly. But I think the end goal for everybody is to make sure that we are moving ahead and rebuilding in a way that serves us all. You know, we know from good evidence that if we've got diversity in our workforce or diversity in our leadership, that we tend to be better, whether that is a state agency or a government agency or whether that's a business. And so that's part of what we want to continue to drive forward, is that when we do look to rehire, that we look to rehire in places that allow businesses to connect with different communities, if you will, or to connect with different perspectives that help drive innovation in their own spheres.
Perfect. And I'm going to shift the question a little bit for Hannah and Megan. You know, for as long back as I can remember, when you just say immigration, sometimes that brings up other political polarization. When we talk about workforce, I think it it sometimes doesn't, because it's more about, for whatever reason, it's employers and employees finding each other. Tell me, let's see, Hannah, I'll have you go first, but tell me a little bit about, what do you see as an opportunity going forward? Do you think there's an opportunity to see some federal changes to immigration law? And I'm curious if you're hoping it would be, or not hoping, but if the strategy is more of a piecemeal approach, or if you think there are some other sort of comprehensive approaches that your organization would want to see in the coming years.
Yeah, one thing before I get to that I just wanted to add to Lee and Kit's answers is that Edelman just came out with a new survey a few days ago asking people who their most trusted source of information is, and the majority of people said their employers. So from a business standpoint, I think it's really interesting, and businesses, I mean, frankly, governments have as well in some states and, with varying success, but businesses have really taken the lead on innovative ways to communicate with their workers, breweries producing hand sanitizers, trying to think creatively about how to work together in the face of COVID-19. And so as businesses start to think about how they communicate about this virus and the recovery to come, I just thought that was interesting to note, that people are looking to their employers for that information more so than anybody else. To immigration reform. So a little bit towards what Megan was talking about before and what I was talking about. I hope that post-COVID provides an opportunity in this space. Like you said, immigration sort of creates a whole bunch of other issues that that are scary politically for a lot of lawmakers, and it makes change hard. One of the things that we at NAE try to do is create a new language that is often about jobs and workforce and communities to pull some of the politics out of it. And I think, as we think about different pieces of the workforce that, as Kit pointed out, are supported by immigrants. I mean, immigrants are 16.5% of healthcare workers. And just for perspective, immigrants are 13.7% of the population. So they overrepresent in a lot of the sectors that we need right now. I hope that that moves the immigration issue from a hyper-polarized one to a workforce one, and one that we can tackle once we're through this crisis at the political level with a real systemic overhaul. I think piecemeal versus comprehensive, whether it's going to be one bill or multiple bills, I think it's really hard to reform one piece of the immigration system without it bleeding into the others. The truth is it's all connected. And so my guess is that we will be looking at a systemic overhaul when it happens, and I think it will. Whether that is through a process of many bills or one bill. But I hope that, this presents an opportunity after the fact. I hope that some of the politics that have dominated this country across a wide variety of issues over the past few years in particular are tempered in the face of a common enemy. So I'm hopeful.
And Megan, fill us in. I know for the Colorado Business Roundtable, we're really taking an approach of listening to the business community first. Tell us a little bit about what you're planning as far as listening tours.
Yeah, so we'll be holding listening tours. We're going to have meetings of business leaders throughout the state of Colorado in all 7 congressional districts, and inviting the representatives and senators of Colorado, of which some of them have been talked to and are very excited about it, but to actually have a sit-down conversation and figure out not only what are the workforce needs, for their individual business, but how do they cross over, and how's immigration impacting them from, an HR standpoint that we've talked about earlier, and translating resumes or translating skills and certificates, and making sure, those that are underemployed are capable of being connected into these businesses who can understand those resumes and the HR representatives. And from also, I think what's really helpful for this discussion now, especially, and something that Hannah just touched on, is that there's such a desire to work with each other right now and be innovative and be creative. and helping different industries understand what other industries' issues are. And so we're all kind of talking about the same thing and not so focused in on what's happening exactly with our business. And something I think that's really important and what is also making me feel quite hopeful about this discussion is that something that would be said, I know quite often when discussing comprehensive immigration reform, is to not let perfection get in the way of progress. And so you would run into issues where different industries would be battling each other to try to make sure that they had exactly what they needed, if something was moving forward, et cetera. And I think something that we're learning now is that these companies are capable of jumping and doing something completely different. So for example, we have Denver Mattress, who just took their production and flipped it, and now they're all their machines and workers are making masks right now and not mattresses. And so you have all these companies that are trying to work together and understand what they can bring to the table. And I think that this is going to create an opportunity for not only business leaders but industry leaders to come together and try to work through some of these various issues that everyone's dealing with. And it is affecting, Anna's point, immigration reform. And as you said, it's a four-letter word. And the reality is that immigration is a workforce issue, and workforce is an immigration issue. And workforce and the economy are something that are incredibly important in normal times, even more so now. And NAE has incredible stats and data that anyone, if you go to their website, you can see not only from a state perspective, but down into the cities. For example, we have over 500,000 immigrant residents that are here in Colorado. They pay $1.5 billion in state and local taxes, $3.5 billion in spending power. That's huge on a normal day. And now we're dealing with an economic crisis right now. And so these are things that I think that we should really be talking about. And I think people are in a place to want to hear it right now.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. This conversation was really interesting, and I think we only touched on the tip of the iceberg on some of these important issues. And I suspect in 3 or 4 weeks, we'll even know more about how the workforce is looking, particularly in Colorado. So it'd be fun to invite all of you back. If any of you have a quick closing comment or a website you want to direct our folks to, I'll just open it up to see if you want to give any final word or action statement to the folks listening today.
I'll start, although Megan did half my job for me, which I really appreciate. But I would just want to say that we are doing our best to be a resource to partners like the other people on this panel, but also I think like the viewers. So we have a lot of data. We actually just launched an immigration and COVID research portal that you can see on our website, newamericaneconomy.org. We have a lot of data. We're updating it almost every single day, trying to get the numbers out there that particularly local elected officials and business leaders need. So if there's something you need but you don't see it, please get in touch. We also have a resource page for state and local governments that we're building out, and a list of organizations that are direct services to immigrant populations around the country. So the extent that you want to help or donate, take a look. Thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you so much. Lee or Kit, any closing comments for us today?
Debbie, thank you for the space to have this conversation. It's definitely critical in this time as we look to support Coloradans and businesses and moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, I echo what Lee said, and did want to remind folks that all the state's efforts related to COVID are on a single website. It's covid19.colorado.gov. It's updated daily, and we're also looking forward to launching additional outward-facing public materials for employers and employees alike as we respond to workforce needs during this time and then also afterwards. So I'll share that with you, Debbie, in a couple of weeks when that is up, so you can share it with your membership.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kit and Lee and Hannah and Megan, for joining us today. I think this issue is only going to become more critical as we look out into 2020 and what workforce needs are going to be met, not only for Colorado, but across the country. And I just want to also say at Colorado Business Roundtable, we're honored to work with strategic partners to help be a pro-business voice on pillar priorities like this. So we're looking forward to having more virtual roundtables soon. Our belief is when business succeeds, people succeed, and Colorado ultimately succeeds. So we're happy to share that story. So thank you all for joining us today.